In the remote highlands of Scotland, where ancient castles pierce through morning mist and legends whisper through every stone corridor, a single moment of curiosity would spark the most extraordinary adventure in royal history. What started as an innocent game of hide-and-seek would become a race against time, revealing family secrets buried for generations, and testing the limits of loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a young prince and his most trusted protector. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sprawling grounds of Ravenwood Castle, as 8-year-old Prince Alexander Edward Blackwood pressed his face against the cold window of the tower room. His breath fogged the glass as he watched the guards changing shift below, their red uniforms moving in perfect formation across the cobblestone courtyard. It was the third day of their summer retreat to the family's ancestral Scottish estate, and already the young prince was growing restless with the endless lessons and formal dinners that seemed to follow him wherever he went. "Your Highness, perhaps we should return to your studies," suggested Miss Hartwell, his governess, as she arranged his books on the ancient oak table. Her voice carried the familiar tone of gentle authority that had guided Alexander through countless hours of mathematics, history, and royal protocol. Alexander turned from the window, his dark eyes sparkling with the kind of mischief that made his security detail nervous. "Miss Hartwell, did you know that this castle has secret passages? Real ones, not just in storybooks." The governess smiled patiently. "I'm sure it does, Your Highness. Many old castles do. However, that doesn't mean young princes should go exploring them." But Alexander's mind was already racing with possibilities. He had heard the whispered conversations between the staff, caught fragments of stories about hidden tunnels and forgotten chambers that honeycombed the ancient structure. His great-grandfather had apparently known every secret corridor and hidden door in Ravenwood, using them during his own childhood adventures more than 70 years ago. Captain James Macready, head of Alexander's personal security, entered the room with his characteristic purposeful stride. At 35, Macready was a decorated military veteran who had served the royal family for over a decade. His weathered face bore the marks of someone who had seen action in far-off places. But his gray eyes softened whenever he looked at the young prince he had sworn to protect. "Good morning, Your Highness," Macready said, offering a respectful bow. "I trust you slept well." "Captain Macready!" Alexander's face lit up. "Tell me about the secret passages. You must know where they are." Macready exchanged a knowing glance with Miss Hartwell. "Well, Your Highness, I've heard tales, but I'm afraid my job is to keep you safe, not to encourage exploration of potentially dangerous old tunnels." "But surely there's no real danger," Alexander pressed. "It's just old stone corridors, isn't it?" The captain's expression grew more serious. "Old stone has a way of shifting, Your Highness. What was safe 100 years ago might not be safe today. Besides, these mountains have claimed their share of lost souls over the centuries." Something in Macready's tone sent a small shiver down Alexander's spine, but it only served to fuel his curiosity further. After lunch, while Miss Hartwell attended to correspondence and Captain Macready met with the castle's security team, Alexander found himself alone in the vast library. The room stretched 3 stories high, its walls lined with thousands of leather-bound volumes that seemed to hold the secrets of centuries. He had discovered, quite by accident, that one of the heavy books on medieval history was actually hollow. Inside, he had found a folded piece of parchment covered in faded ink drawings that looked suspiciously like floor plans. The drawings showed the castle's layout, but with additional lines and markings that suggested hidden pathways, threading through the walls like the veins in a leaf. Alexander studied the map carefully, tracing the lines with his finger. According to the drawings, there was an entrance to the passage system behind a bookshelf in this very library. The map showed a small symbol next to one section of shelving, along with what appeared to be instructions written in his great-grandfather's distinctive handwriting. The afternoon wore on, and Alexander found himself returning to the map again and again. The more he studied it, the more convinced he became that he could safely explore just a short distance into the passages. After all, he reasoned, what harm could there be in satisfying his curiosity about his family's ancestral home? As the castle settled into the quiet rhythm of late afternoon, Alexander made his decision. He carefully replaced the map in the hollow book and positioned it back on the shelf where he could easily find it again. Then he began his search for the hidden entrance. The library's shelving was ancient and massive, each section reaching from floor to ceiling. Alexander methodically examined each bookshelf, looking for the small carved symbol that marked the entrance on his map. His search led him to a section devoted to Scottish clan histories, where dusty volumes recounted the feuds and alliances that had shaped the Highlands for generations. There, carved discreetly into the dark wood at child's eye level, was the symbol from the map, a small raven with outstretched wings, the Blackwood family crest. Alexander's heart raced as he pressed against the carving. To his amazement, it gave slightly under pressure, and he heard the faint sound of old mechanisms engaging somewhere within the wall. The entire bookshelf swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow stone corridor that disappeared into darkness beyond the reach of the library's afternoon light. Cool air flowed from the opening, carrying with it the scent of old stone and the faintest hint of something Alexander couldn't quite identify, something that reminded him of the deep forest after rain. Alexander hesitated for only a moment. He retrieved a small electric torch from the library desk and stepped across the threshold into the hidden world that had been waiting for him behind the walls of Ravenwood Castle. The passage was narrow but well constructed, with smooth stone walls that showed the skill of medieval craftsmen. Alexander could see that the floor had been worn smooth by generations of feet, suggesting that these corridors had once seen regular use. The torch beam revealed that the passage extended straight ahead for about 20 feet before branching off in two directions. Following the map from memory, Alexander chose the left branch, which according to the drawings would take him past several rooms before eventually leading to another exit near the castle's great hall. The adventure was everything he had imagined. Mysterious, exciting, and absolutely forbidden, which made it all the more thrilling. The passage wound through the castle's ancient walls, occasionally opening into small chambers that had clearly been used for storage in ages past. In one, Alexander discovered old wooden chests bound with iron, though he didn't dare try to open them. In another, he found what appeared to be a small altar or shrine, with carved figures that seemed to dance in the flickering light of his torch. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the timeless corridors. Alexander had intended to explore for just a few minutes, but the network of passages proved to be far more extensive than he had anticipated. Each turn revealed new wonders, each chamber held new mysteries, and the young prince found himself drawn deeper and deeper into the hidden heart of his ancestral home. It wasn't until his torch beam began to grow noticeably dimmer that Alexander realized he might be in trouble. He had been walking for what felt like hours, and despite his confidence in following the map, nothing around him looked familiar. The passages had branched and reconnected in ways that the simple drawings hadn't adequately captured, and Alexander began to suspect that the map he had found showed only a small portion of a much larger underground network. The first tendrils of real fear began to creep into his thoughts as he realized that he could no longer remember which turns he had taken to reach his current location. The torch continued to dim, and Alexander understood with growing panic that soon he would be alone in complete darkness, lost in a maze of stone corridors beneath one of Scotland's most remote castles. Above ground, Captain Macready completed his security briefing and returned to check on the prince. As was his habit, every hour on the hour. The library was empty, and Miss Hartwell informed him that she had last seen Alexander reading there over an hour ago. A systematic search of the prince's usual hiding places revealed nothing, and within minutes, Macready had activated the castle's emergency protocols. The ancient stones of Ravenwood Castle had witnessed many dramas over the centuries, but few as urgent as the search that now began in earnest. Staff members spread throughout the vast structure, calling Alexander's name and checking every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. The castle's grounds were scoured by security teams, and the surrounding countryside was searched by volunteers from the nearby village. But Prince Alexander Edward Blackwood was nowhere to be found, and as the Scottish evening began to close in around Ravenwood Castle, Captain Macready faced the most terrifying possibility of his career. The young prince entrusted to his protection had simply vanished without a trace. In the hidden passages beneath the castle, Alexander's torch finally died, plunging him into a darkness so complete It seemed to have physical weight. The young prince sat down on the cold stone floor and tried to control his rising panic. Somewhere far above, he could hear the faint sounds of voices calling his name, but the stone walls were too thick and the voices too distant for him to make himself heard. For the first time in his young life, Prince Alexander was truly alone, lost in the ancient mysteries of his family's past, while above him, the people who loved him most began the desperate search that would test every bond of loyalty and courage that connected them to the lost Prince of Ravenwood. The adventure he had craved so desperately had become a nightmare, and as Alexander sat in the darkness listening to the distant echoes of his name, he began to understand that some family secrets were buried in darkness for very good reasons indeed. Captain Macready stood in the center of the library, his trained eyes scanning every detail of the room where Prince Alexander had last been seen. The evening light streaming through the tall windows cast long shadows between the towering bookshelves, creating a maze of light and darkness that seemed to mock his systematic search efforts. "Sir, we've completed the sweep of the West Wing," reported Sergeant Collins, one of Macready's most trusted team members. "No sign of His Highness anywhere. The kitchen staff confirms they haven't seen him since lunch, and the grounds team has found no trace of him in the gardens or the courtyard." Macready nodded grimly, his mind racing through possibilities. In his 10 years of protecting the royal family, he had never lost track of any member for more than a few minutes. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical force, and he could feel the familiar knot of anxiety forming in his stomach that always accompanied moments of extreme danger. "What about the towers?" Macready asked, though he knew his team was thorough. "Checked twice, sir. All locked, just as they should be. The staircases show no recent disturbance, and the dust patterns suggest no one has been up there in weeks." Miss Hartwell entered the library, her usually composed demeanor showing cracks of worry. "Captain, I've questioned the staff again. No one has seen Alexander leave the library. It's as if he simply disappeared into thin air." Macready studied the governess carefully. In crisis situations, he had learned to read people's expressions and body language for clues they might not even realize they possessed. Miss Hartwell appeared genuinely puzzled and increasingly frightened, which matched his own assessment of the situation's gravity. "Miss Hartwell, I need you to think carefully. What was Alexander's mood today? Did he seem interested in anything particular? Any questions that struck you as unusual?" The governess considered for a moment, wrapping her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. "Well, he did ask about secret passages this morning. Said he'd heard they existed in the castle. I told him that many old castles had them, but that didn't mean young princes should explore them." Something clicked in Macready's mind. He had heard similar stories about Ravenwood's hidden corridors, tales passed down through generations of security personnel who had worked at the castle. Most dismissed them as folklore, but Macready's military training had taught him never to dismiss intelligence, even if it seemed unlikely. "Sergeant Collins, I want you to contact the castle's caretaker, old McKinnon. He's worked here longer than anyone else. If there are secret passages, he'll know about them." As Collins hurried away to locate the elderly caretaker, Macready began a more focused examination of the library itself. If Alexander had discovered some kind of hidden entrance, there would be clues. The captain's trained eye noted details that others might miss. The pattern of dust on certain books, the wear marks on the floor, the way shadows fell differently in certain corners of the room. Meanwhile, far below in the hidden passages, Alexander had overcome his initial panic and was trying to think logically about his situation. The complete darkness was disorienting, but he forced himself to remember his father's advice about staying calm in difficult circumstances. "A clear head finds solutions that panic cannot see," his father had told him during a particularly challenging riding lesson last summer. Alexander felt along the walls carefully, using his hands to map the space around him. The passage seemed to continue in both directions, and he could feel air movement that suggested larger openings somewhere ahead. More importantly, he began to notice that the distant sounds of people calling his name seemed slightly louder in one direction than the other. The young prince made a decision. Rather than sitting still and waiting for rescue, he would try to work his way toward the sounds. Even if he couldn't call back loudly enough to be heard, Perhaps he could get close enough to one of the exits to make some noise that would attract attention. Moving carefully in the darkness, Alexander began to follow the wall in the direction where the voices seemed strongest. The stone was cold beneath his hands, but he found that by moving slowly and testing each step, he could navigate the corridor safely even without light. Back in the library, Sergeant Collins returned with Duncan Mackinnon, the castle's head caretaker for the past 40 years. Mackinnon was a weathered man in his 70s, with the kind of deep knowledge of Ravenwood that comes from decades of maintaining every stone, every beam, every hidden corner of the ancient structure. "Mr. Mackinnon," Macready said urgently, "I need you to tell me about any secret passages or hidden rooms in this castle. This isn't folklore time. A child's life may depend on accurate information." The old caretaker studied Macready's face, recognizing the seriousness of the situation. "Aye, Captain, there are passages. Built during the clan wars, they were when the Blackwoods needed ways to move unseen through their own home. Most of them were sealed up decades ago, but a few," he paused, looking around the library. "A few might still be accessible." "Show me," Macready commanded. Mackinnon moved toward the section of shelving devoted to Scottish history, his gnarled fingers tracing along the carved woodwork. The old Duke, Alexander's great-grandfather, he knew all the secrets of this place, used to play in these passages as a lad according to his stories. There should be an entrance somewhere along here. The caretaker's fingers found the carved raven symbol, and he pressed it with the confidence of long familiarity. The bookshelf swung inward, revealing the dark corridor beyond, and Macready felt his heart sink with the realization of what had happened. "Bloody hell," Mackinnon muttered. "I thought this one was permanently sealed. The mechanism shouldn't work anymore." Macready was already retrieving a powerful flashlight from his equipment kit. "How extensive are these passages?" "Extensive enough," Mackinnon replied grimly. "They connect to caves in the mountain, old storage chambers, even some natural caverns that were incorporated into the system. A person could wander for days down there and never find their way out." The captain felt the weight of disaster settling on his shoulders. He immediately radioed for additional search teams while mentally calculating how long Alexander had been missing. Nearly 3 hours now, long enough for a curious child to become hopelessly lost in a maze of stone corridors. "Mackinnon, I need you to guide a search team through these passages. You know them better than anyone." The old caretaker shook his head slowly. "Captain, I know some of them, but not all. The system is older than this castle, older than memory. Parts of it go back to the ancient Picts who lived in these mountains before the Scots ever arrived. Even the old Duke didn't know every corridor and chamber." Macready made the decision that would define the rest of the evening. "Then we search what we can reach. Sergeant Collins, I want 3 teams assembled immediately. Full search gear, rope, extra lights, and communication equipment. We're going underground." As the search teams prepared their equipment, Macready took a moment to send word to Alexander's parents, who were attending a state function in Edinburgh. The message was brief and carefully worded, but its meaning was clear. Their son was missing under circumstances that required immediate attention. The first search team, led by Macready himself with Mackinnon as guide, entered the passages within 20 minutes of discovering the hidden entrance. Their powerful lights revealed corridors that spoke of centuries of history, smooth stone walls worn by generations of feet, carved symbols that marked important junctions, and the occasional chamber filled with artifacts from ages past. "This way leads to the old storage areas," Mackinnon explained as they reached the first major intersection. "That way connects to the natural cave system. And that passage there, well, that one goes deeper into the mountain than anyone has mapped." Macready divided his team at the intersection, sending Collins down the cave passage while he and Mackinnon explored the storage areas. Each team maintained radio contact, calling out regularly for Alexander and reporting their progress to the command post established in the library above. In the depths of the passages, Alexander had been making steady progress toward the sounds of searchers. The voices were definitely getting louder, and he could now make out individual words being called. The knowledge that people were looking for him filled him with both relief and shame. Relief that he would soon be found, and shame that his curiosity had caused so much trouble for so many people. The young prince had learned to navigate by sound and touch, feeling his way along the walls, and listening carefully for changes in the acoustics that might indicate larger chambers or branching passages. He had discovered that the corridors carried sound in strange ways, with voices seeming to come from multiple directions at once due to echoes and the complex layout of the passage system. Alexander paused when he heard something new, the sound of footsteps and equipment moving through the passages. The searchers were definitely getting closer, but the confusing acoustics made it impossible to determine exactly where they were. He tried calling out, shouting as loudly as he could manage, but his young voice seemed to be swallowed by the stone corridors. Macready's team had been searching for over an hour when they heard it. A faint sound that might have been a child's voice carried through the stone passages like a whisper on the wind. The captain immediately ordered silence, and the team stood perfectly still, straining their ears for any repeat of the sound. There! McKinnon pointed down a corridor that branched off to their right. I heard it too, Captain. Sounded like a lad calling for help. The search team moved quickly but carefully down the indicated passage, their lights dancing across walls covered with ancient carvings and mysterious symbols. Macready called out regularly, his voice echoing through the corridors. Alexander, can you hear me? We're coming to get you. The response came almost immediately this time, a young voice calling back, much clearer now and definitely recognizable as Prince Alexander. Macready felt a surge of relief so strong it nearly buckled his knees. The prince was alive, conscious, and able to respond. Stay where you are, Your Highness, Macready called out. Keep talking so we can find you. Following the sound of Alexander's voice, the search team navigated through several more turns and junctions. The passages here were older and more roughly hewn than those they had explored earlier, suggesting they had found their way into the most ancient part of the underground system. When Macready's flashlight beam finally fell upon Prince Alexander, sitting against a wall in a small chamber and looking both relieved and thoroughly chastened, the captain had to resist the urge to scoop the boy up in an enormous bear hug. Instead, he approached professionally, though his voice betrayed his emotional state. Your Highness, are you injured? Are you hurt in any way? Alexander shook his head, tears of relief visible on his cheeks. No, Captain Macready. I'm not hurt, but I'm very sorry for causing so much trouble. I just wanted to see the secret passages, and then I got lost, and my torch died, and... It's all right, lad, Macready said gently, finally allowing himself to kneel down and check the prince for any signs of injury. The important thing is that you're safe. But we need to get you out of here and back to people who are very worried about you. The journey back through the passages took nearly an hour, with Alexander staying close to Macready's side and McKinnon leading them through the safest route back to the library. When they finally emerged through the hidden bookshelf entrance, Alexander was greeted by Miss Hartwell, whose emotional relief was evident in her tear-filled embrace. But even as the immediate crisis resolved, Macready couldn't shake the feeling that this incident had revealed something important about Ravenwood Castle and its hidden secrets. The passages were more extensive than anyone had realized, and some of them led to places that even old McKinnon didn't recognize. As Alexander was reunited with his worried staff and the search teams were recalled from the underground labyrinth, Captain Macready made a mental note to conduct a full survey of the passage system. If the royal family was going to continue using Ravenwood as a retreat, they needed to understand exactly what lay hidden beneath their ancestral home. The young prince had been found safe, but his adventure had opened a door to mysteries that had been sealed away for generations. And somewhere in the deepest parts of those ancient passages, secrets waited that would soon prove to be far more significant than anyone could have imagined. The morning after Alexander's rescue dawned gray and misty, with low clouds clinging to the Scottish Highlands like secrets unwilling to be revealed. Inside Ravenwood Castle, the prince sat at the breakfast table, picking at his porridge while stealing glances at Captain Macready, who stood by the window reviewing security reports. The events of the previous evening had cast a shadow over the entire household, and Alexander could feel the weight of disappointment from everyone around him. Your Highness, Miss Hartwell said gently, setting down her teacup. Your parents will arrive this afternoon. I think it would be wise for you to spend some time considering what you'll say to them about yesterday's adventure. Alexander nodded miserably. He knew his parents would be worried, angry, and probably ready to cut short their stay at Ravenwood. The thought of disappointing them was almost worse than being lost in the dark passages had been. He had wanted to experience something exciting and magical, but instead had caused fear and panic for everyone who cared about him. Captain Macready turned from the window, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. "Your Highness, I've been thinking about what happened yesterday. You mentioned finding a map that showed the passage entrances. Would you be willing to show me where you discovered it?" Alexander looked up hopefully. At least Captain Macready wasn't treating him like a naughty child who needed to be scolded. "Of course, Captain. It was hidden inside one of the old books in the library. I found it by accident when I was reading about the castle's history." After breakfast, Alexander led Captain Macready and Duncan Mackinnon back to the library. The hidden bookshelf entrance had been sealed again, but the memory of the previous evening's drama still lingered in the room like an unwelcome guest. Alexander went directly to the shelf where he had found the hollow book, retrieving the volume on medieval history and opening it to reveal the hidden map. Macready studied the parchment carefully, noting the quality of the ink and the style of the drawings. "Mr. Hatsey, Mackinnon, does this look familiar to you?" The old caretaker examined the map with interest. "Aye, that's the old Duke's hand, no mistake. He was always drawing maps and diagrams, trying to understand the full extent of the passage system. But this map," Mackinnon paused, studying the markings more carefully. "This shows passages I've never seen before, and I thought I knew every corridor in this castle."
"What do you mean?"
Alexander asked, his curiosity temporarily overriding his chastened mood. Mackinnon pointed to several areas on the map where intricate symbols marked specific locations. These symbols here, they're not just marking entrances and exits. They're marking something specific. Storage chambers, maybe, or meeting rooms. And look here. He indicated a section of the map that showed passages extending far beyond the castle walls. This suggests the underground system connects to natural caves that go deep into the mountain itself. Captain Macready felt a familiar stirring of professional concern. His military background had taught him that hidden passages and secret storage areas usually meant hidden dangers as well. If the passage system was more extensive than anyone realized, and if it connected to caves and the surrounding mountains, then Ravenwood Castle might not be as secure as everyone believed. "Mr. Mackinnon, I want to organize a proper survey of these passages. If we're going to continue using this castle for royal visits, I need to understand exactly what's down there, and whether it represents any kind of security risk." The old caretaker nodded thoughtfully. "That would be wise, Captain. The old Duke always said there were parts of the system he never fully explored. Some of the passages go back centuries, maybe longer. And there are stories." "What kind of stories?" Alexander asked, his interest clearly piqued despite his earlier troubles. Mackinnon glanced at Captain Macready, who nodded encouragingly. "Well, lad, there are tales about these passages being used for more than just hiding during clan wars. Stories about ancient treasures hidden away during times of trouble, about secret meetings and hidden chambers filled with things the Blackwood family wanted to keep safe from their enemies." Alexander's eyes widened. "Real treasure? Like gold and jewels?" "Possibly," Mackinnon said, "but also documents, artifacts, things that might be more valuable than gold to the right people. The Blackwoods were always collectors of secrets, and they had centuries to accumulate things worth hiding." Captain Macready made a decision that would change the course of their stay at Ravenwood. "I'm going to contact headquarters and request a specialized team to survey these passages properly. But in the meantime, Your Highness, I want your word that you won't venture into those passages again without adult supervision." "You have it, Captain," Alexander said solemnly. "But does this mean we might actually explore them together?" Macready smiled slightly. "It means we might explore them safely, with proper equipment and precautions. If there really are family treasures or important historical artifacts down there, they should be properly cataloged and preserved." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sergeant Collins, who entered the library with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Captain, you need to see this immediately." "We've discovered something in the passages." Macready's attention snapped to full alertness. "What kind of something?" "We were conducting final safety checks in the areas where we searched last night, making sure all our equipment had been recovered. One of the team noticed that there was a draft coming from what appeared to be a solid wall. When we investigated more closely, we found a concealed door." Alexander practically bounced with excitement, while Macready felt the familiar tension of a developing situation. "Show me," the captain ordered. The small group made their way through the hidden entrance and into the passage system, following Sergeant Collins through corridors that Alexander now recognized from his previous evening's adventure. They moved deeper into the mountain than the rescue teams had gone the night before, reaching areas where the passages were carved directly from living rock rather than constructed with stone blocks. "Here, sir," Collins said, indicating what appeared to be a smooth section of wall. "If you feel along the rock face, you can sense the air movement." MacCready ran his hands along the stone surface, searching for any irregularities. His fingers found a series of small carved symbols that were nearly invisible, unless you knew where to look for them. When he pressed against them in sequence, following a pattern similar to what Alexander had discovered in the library, the wall section swung inward on hidden hinges. The chamber beyond was unlike anything they had seen in the passage system so far. This was clearly a constructed room rather than a natural cave, with dressed stone walls and a vaulted ceiling that spoke of skilled medieval craftsmanship. But it was the chamber's contents that made everyone stop and stare in amazement. Against one wall stood a series of wooden chests bound with iron, their surfaces carved with the blackwood raven and other heraldic symbols. Along another wall, shelves held what appeared to be ancient manuscripts and documents, some bound in leather covers that looked centuries old. In the center of the chamber, a large stone table held maps, drawings, and what looked like genealogical charts tracing the Blackwood family line back through generations. "Mother of God," McKinnon whispered. "It's the old Duke's private archive. We always heard stories that he had a secret repository somewhere in the castle, but no one ever found it." Alexander approached one of the chests carefully, his eyes wide with wonder. "Captain MacCready, this is like something from an adventure story. Real family treasure, just like in the books." MacCready was already thinking about the security and historical implications of their discovery. "Mr. McKinnon, how long has this chamber been sealed?" "Based on the dust patterns and the condition of these items, I'd say decades at least. Probably not opened since the old Duke died back in the 1950s. He was always secretive about his historical research, claimed he was working on a comprehensive history of the Blackwood family, but never published anything." Sergeant Collins was examining the documents on the central table. "Captain, some of these papers look much more recent than medieval. There are photographs here and what appears to be correspondence from the 20th century. MacCready joined his sergeant at the table, studying the materials more carefully. Among the historical documents and family genealogies, there were indeed more modern additions. Photographs of people in early 20th century clothing, letters bearing official government seals, and maps that showed not just the castle and its passages, but locations throughout Scotland marked with various symbols. This is more than just family history, MacCready realized. Some of these documents appear to be related to government or military matters. Look at these photographs. Some of these people are wearing uniforms I don't recognize, but they're definitely from the World War era." Alexander had moved to examine one of the bound chests, noting that unlike the others, this one appeared to have been opened more recently. The dust pattern around it was different, and the lock showed signs of recent use. "Captain MacCready, I think someone has been in this chamber more recently than we thought." The captain joined Alexander at the chest, noting the same details the observant young prince had spotted. When he carefully lifted the lid, they found the chest filled with modern documents, photographs, letters, and official papers that were clearly from the past few decades rather than the past few centuries. "Sergeant Collins, I want this chamber secured immediately. No one else enters without my direct authorization, and I want a full inventory of everything here, but nothing is to be moved or disturbed until we understand what we're dealing with." McKinnon looked troubled. "Captain, if someone has been using this chamber recently, they would have needed to know about the passage system and the location of the hidden entrances. That's knowledge that very few people possess." The implications were clear and unsettling. Someone with access to Ravenwood Castle had been using the old Duke's secret archive for purposes unknown. The chamber contained materials that spanned centuries, from medieval family documents to modern correspondence, that might involve matters of state security. As they made their way back through the passages toward the library, Alexander's mind raced with questions and possibilities. What had started as a simple adventure in family history had uncovered something far more complex and potentially significant. The young prince began to understand that his curiosity had led them not just to hidden treasure, but to family secrets that someone had been keeping very deliberately concealed. Captain Macready was already planning the security protocols that would be needed to properly investigate their discovery, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled onto something that went far beyond a simple collection of family artifacts. The combination of historical documents and modern materials suggested that the Blackwood family's past was connected to their present in ways that no one had suspected. As they emerged back into the library, Alexander looked at the map that had started his adventure with new understanding. The symbols and markings that had seemed like simple historical curiosities now appeared to mark locations of genuine significance. His great-grandfather's secret archive was just the beginning of mysteries that reached back through centuries of family history and forward into the present day. The discovery would soon attract attention from people far beyond the castle walls, and Alexander's innocent exploration would prove to have consequences that none of them could have anticipated. The lost prince had found much more than his way back to safety. He had found the key to secrets that powerful people had worked very hard to keep buried in the ancient stones of Ravenwood Castle. The arrival of Prince Alexander's parents that afternoon brought with it an entourage that transformed the quiet castle into a hub of activity. King Edward and Queen Margaret came not only to collect their adventurous son, but also accompanied by a team of historians, security experts, and government officials who had been hastily assembled after Captain Macready's preliminary report about the discovered archive. Alexander stood nervously in the great hall as his parents approached, their expressions mixing relief at his safety with concern about the broader implications of what he had inadvertently uncovered. Queen Margaret embraced her son immediately, while King Edward studied him with the careful gaze of a father, trying to understand how much trouble his child had actually caused. "Alexander," the king said gently but seriously, "Captain Macready has told us about your adventure and what you discovered. Are you certain you're unharmed?" "Yes, father," Alexander replied, then added with characteristic honesty, "But I'm very sorry for causing so much worry. I didn't think about how dangerous it might be, or how frightened everyone would become when they couldn't find me." Queen Margaret smoothed her son's hair affectionately. "The important thing is that you're safe, darling. But Captain Macready tells us that your curiosity has led to some very significant discoveries about our family history." Dr. Elizabeth Whitmore, the royal family's chief historian, approached with a thick folder of preliminary notes. "Your Majesty, based on our initial examination of the archive chamber, we're dealing with documents that span nearly 4 centuries of Blackwood family history. Some of the materials have important implications for Scottish historical research, and others," she paused meaningfully, "appear to touch on matters of more recent political significance." King Edward's expression grew more serious. "What kind of political significance?" "Documents related to intelligence activities during both World Wars, correspondence with various government departments, and what appears to be evidence of the Blackwood family's involvement in covert operations that continued well into the 1970s, Dr. Whitmore explained. "Your great-grandfather appears to have been far more than just an eccentric aristocrat with an interest in family history." Captain Macready stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we've also discovered evidence that someone has been accessing the archive chamber within the past few years. This wasn't simply a sealed historical repository. It's been an active storage location for materials of unknown purpose." The implications hung heavy in the air. Alexander looked between the adults, beginning to understand that his adventure had uncovered something far more serious than family treasure or historical curiosities. His great-grandfather, whom he had always thought of as a mysterious but harmless figure from family stories, had apparently been involved in activities that still had relevance decades after his death. "Have you identified who might have been using the chamber recently?" King Edward asked. "We're working on that, sir," Macready replied. "The access would have required detailed knowledge of the passage system and the location of the hidden entrances. That limits the possibilities to people with long-standing connections to Ravenwood Castle and the family." Duncan Mackinnon stepped forward hesitantly. "Your Majesty, if I may, there's something else you should know about the old Duke's activities. My father worked at Ravenwood before me, and he used to tell stories about strange visitors who would come to meet with the Duke during the war years. People who didn't look like ordinary guests, if you understand my meaning. Intelligence operatives? Dr. Whitmore asked. Possibly, ma'am. And the meetings didn't stop after the war ended. Even into the 1960s and 70s, there were occasional visits from people who would arrive quietly and leave the same way. My father always assumed they were using the castle for government business of some kind. Alexander listened to this revelation with growing fascination. His great-grandfather hadn't just been collecting family history, he had apparently been part of a network of people involved in secret activities that continued long after most people assumed such things would have ended. Dr. Whitmore, Queen Margaret said, what's your assessment of the historical value of these documents? Extraordinary, Your Majesty. If even half of what we've seen so far proves authentic, it will require significant revision of our understanding of both Scottish noble families' roles during wartime and the extent of civilian involvement in intelligence operations. The genealogical materials alone trace connections between the Blackwood family and other noble houses that were never previously documented. Commander Sarah Hayes, head of the Royal Protection Service, had been studying the security implications. Your Majesty, we need to consider the possibility that whoever has been using this archive may return. If these documents contain sensitive information about historical intelligence operations, there could be people who have strong motivations to either retrieve or destroy them. Alexander felt a thrill of excitement mixed with genuine concern. Father, does this mean we're in danger? King Edward considered his answer carefully. Not immediate danger, son. But it does mean we need to be very careful about how we proceed. These discoveries need to be properly investigated, and the materials need to be secured until we understand their full significance. As the afternoon progressed, teams of specialists worked to carefully document and remove the most sensitive materials from the archive chamber. Alexander was allowed to observe the process, though under strict supervision and with clear instructions not to touch anything without permission. The chamber yielded treasures beyond what any of them had initially imagined. Ancient maps showing trade routes and political alliances that had been lost to historical record. Documents revealing the true extent of Scottish noble families' involvement in European politics during critical periods, and photographs and correspondence that painted a picture of Alexander's great-grandfather as a figure of considerable importance in intelligence circles. Look at this, Alexander, Whitmore said, showing him a photograph from the 1940s. This is your great-grandfather meeting with what appears to be a group of Allied intelligence officers. And this document here suggests that Ravenwood Castle was used as a safe house for people being moved through Scotland during the war. Alexander studied the photograph with wonder. The man in the center, clearly recognizable as his great-grandfather despite his youth, stood among a group of serious-looking individuals in military uniforms. The setting was the castle's Great Hall, but the atmosphere was clearly one of important business rather than social gathering. Dr. Whitmore, Alexander asked, why would they keep all of this secret for so long? The war ended decades ago. Sometimes, young man, secrets have a way of remaining sensitive long after the events that created them have passed. Intelligence operations often involve people and methods that need to remain protected for generations. And sometimes, she added thoughtfully, secrets are kept because they involve activities that not everyone would approve of, even in wartime. As evening approached, the initial survey of the archive was completed, and the most sensitive documents were prepared for transport to secure facilities where they could be properly analyzed. But before the materials could be removed from the castle, Commander Hayes received a radio communication that changed everything. Ma'am, we have unauthorized movement detected in the passage system. Someone has entered through an external access point and is moving toward the archive chamber. The casual atmosphere of historical discovery instantly transformed into one of urgent security concern. Captain Macready immediately began coordinating defensive positions, while Commander Hayes implemented protocols for protecting the royal family in potential threat situations. Alexander, you need to come with me immediately, Queen Margaret said, her tone brooking no argument. Miss Hartwell, please ensure that His Highness remains in the secure areas of the castle until this situation is resolved. But Alexander, whose curiosity had started this entire adventure, couldn't resist asking one more question. Commander Hayes, how many people are in the passages? Our sensors indicate at least 3 individuals, possibly more. They're moving with purpose, and they clearly know their way around the passage system. King Edward made a decision that reflected both his concern for his family's safety and his recognition of the broader implications of their discovery. "Commander Hayes, I want these intruders apprehended if possible. We need to understand who they are and what their interest is in these materials." The next hour unfolded like something from an adventure novel, though with far more serious consequences than any story Alexander had ever read. Security teams moved through the castle's passage system in a carefully coordinated operation designed to intercept the intruders before they could reach the archive chamber or any of the royal family. The intruders proved to be professionals. They moved quietly, avoided the main passages where they might be easily trapped, and demonstrated knowledge of the passage system that suggested either extensive preparation or previous access to the same maps that Alexander had discovered. When the security teams finally cornered them in a section of the passages near the natural cave system, the intruders proved to be 3 individuals carrying equipment for document copying and photography. They were clearly not common thieves, but rather people with specific knowledge of what they expected to find in the castle's hidden archives. Captain Macready personally led the team that apprehended them, and his initial interrogation revealed information that cast new light on the entire situation. The intruders were representatives of an intelligence organization that claimed legal authority to access materials related to historical operations. They carried documentation suggesting that the Blackwood family archive contained materials that belonged to government agencies rather than private family collections. "Your Majesty," Captain Macready reported to King Edward, "the situation is more complex than we initially understood. These people aren't simple criminals. They're claiming official authority to access the archive materials. They say some of the documents in the chamber were never meant to be in private hands." The confrontation that followed involved negotiations between the royal family's legal representatives and government officials who appeared at Ravenwood Castle within hours of the intruders' apprehension. Alexander watched from a distance as serious conversations took place about ownership of historical documents, government secrets, and the extent of his family's involvement in activities that had apparently never been officially acknowledged. In the end, a compromise was reached that satisfied all parties while preserving the most important elements of the discovery. The clearly historical materials, genealogies, medieval documents, and artifacts of genuine family significance would remain in royal possession and be properly preserved for future research. The more sensitive materials related to intelligence activities would be turned over to appropriate government authorities for review and determination of their continued classification status. For Alexander, the resolution was both satisfying and somewhat disappointing. His adventure had led to discoveries of genuine historical importance, but also to the realization that some family secrets were more complex and potentially dangerous than he had imagined. As the royal family prepared to leave Ravenwood Castle the following morning, Alexander took one last look at the library where his adventure had begun. The hidden bookshelf entrance had been permanently sealed, but the memory of what lay beyond it would stay with him forever. "Alexander," his father said, joining him by the library windows, "what you've discovered here will be studied by historians for generations. Your curiosity has given us a much deeper understanding of our family's past and its connection to important historical events. But also," Queen Margaret added gently, "it's shown us the importance of thinking carefully about the consequences of our actions. Adventure and discovery are wonderful things, but they must be pursued with wisdom and consideration for others." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "I understand, Mother, and I'm grateful that Captain Macready and everyone else worked so hard to keep me safe when my curiosity led me into danger." Captain Macready, who had been listening to the conversation, approached with a small wrapped package. "Your Highness, before we leave, there's something I think you should have." Alexander unwrapped the package to find a leather-bound journal, its pages blank and waiting for new stories. "What's this for, Captain?" "For recording your own adventures, lad. But perhaps future ones can be planned a bit more carefully, with proper preparation and safety measures in place." Alexander smiled as he accepted the journal. "Thank you, Captain. And I promise that my next adventure will be properly planned and supervised." As the royal convoy departed Ravenwood Castle, Alexander looked back at the ancient towers rising from the Scottish Highlands. His adventure had taught him that family history was far more complex and interesting than he had ever imagined, but also that some secrets were kept hidden for very good reasons. The young prince had learned lessons about curiosity and caution, about the responsibility that comes with privilege, and about the way past and present sometimes intersect in unexpected ways. Most importantly, he had discovered that real adventures, the kind worth having, were best shared with people who could help ensure they ended safely and successfully. In his new journal, Alexander wrote his first entry as the Scottish countryside passed outside his window. Today I learned that every family has secrets, but not all secrets are meant to remain buried forever. Sometimes a lost prince finds more than just his way home. Sometimes he finds the keys to understanding who his family really is. The adventure at Ravenwood Castle was over, but for Prince Alexander Edward Blackwood, it was also the beginning of a lifelong appreciation for history, mystery, and the importance of approaching both with wisdom, courage, and the support of people who truly care about keeping you safe while you explore the wonders of the world.